Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We're presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Cole Zwicker, on to talk about the NBA playoffs, a little bit about the NBA draft at the top here, and we're going to do postmortems on Minnesota, Miami, and who's the third team? San Antonio. I'm sorry. San Antonio is actually the important one because of the Kawhi deal. I have notes here, and I just didn't look at them. So, Cole, it's that kind of week for me, man. How's it going?
It's going well. It's pretty much that kind of week for me, too. Maybe not to the same extent, but I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about the series today and open up with some weird NFL draft talk because I just realized this morning that that's happening and kind of how that correlates with the NBA draft.
Yeah, so like my week this week, my mom is in town. I love my mom. I'm very glad that she came into town with my aunt, who I'm very close with as well. And I've been like kind of running around with them all week. And then additionally, I've had to watch 8 playoff games. Like there were 4 playoff games last night on a weeknight for the first time in like 5 years. And then there were 3 the night before. And then you have this craziness with the College Basketball Commission, which I'm going to talk about at some point on this podcast. I don't know if it's going to be this podcast particularly, though, just because I don't think Cole really cares, right?
Yeah, not so much. I'll listen to what you have to say about it, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a whole lot of a waste of time and bullshit. So I've just enjoyed bitching about it the entire week. And then on top of that, you have NBA draft declarations. You have all of this stuff going on. And then you throw in the NFL draft, which I used to be a huge fan of. I used to like watch it all the time and, you know, go over to friends' houses and we would just hang out and drink beers and watch the NFL draft. But I just don't have the time to do that and didn't have the time to even really recognize until Tuesday that the NFL draft was this week. We were talking before this, and, you know, I talked about this online earlier this morning too. This is being recorded on Thursday morning. I have no idea how NFL draft evaluators do it. I genuinely don't know how they even possibly go about it. It seems impossible to me to evaluate like 25 positions and then contextualize all of those 25 positions in the right order and then like end up having to evaluate guys and then evaluate guys of different positions and then figure out where they should be taken.
Yeah, it's not only about comparative value. It's about just the general player pool and just assessing some of these positions. Like, who the hell knows how to evaluate a quarterback? Like, it's the funniest thing to me on Twitter every year. People have such strong takes on quarterbacks. I have no idea how that's possible. It's such a hard position to predict, probably the hardest in all of sports. So I definitely don't envy guys who have to break down the NFL draft intricately. It's hard enough in the NBA draft when you have, you know, consensus top 10, top, 14 guys. You're not dealing with a player pool that's nearly that large.
Yeah, my only strong NFL draft take this year is that I like feel strongly about Josh Rosen being awesome. Because that dude is just like an awesome human being that I want to have. Like, I want him to be successful. I have no fucking idea if he's going to be successful or not. But, like, I want him to be successful. Beyond that, though, let's kind of just dive into the well, actually, real quick, my mock draft went up at The Athletic earlier today. You've been very busy this morning and did not get a chance to look at it, correct?
Yeah, I did not, unfortunately. Sorry.
So I've got 16 Zaire Smith. I'm at that point now where I'm just like, okay, he's probably going to go in the top 20. Is that still too low for you?
That's fair. Honestly, I think I'll have him a little bit higher than that, but it's not a considerable difference, maybe 10, 11, 12 range. I don't think I'm going to get crazy wild and have him like top 8. We'll see. But 16 is definitely fair. I like that we're similarly on the same page now.
Yeah, like I don't know if he would be that high on my big board, to be honest, but like I think that he is probably going to be selected somewhere in the top 20. Would you rather have him or Shea Alexander?
I would take Zaire. I think his athleticism is difference-making, but I definitely understand the argument for Shea, who's much more established in the skill game. It just kind of comes down to team fit as well. Like if you're rolling the dice on a potential point guard, maybe I could see Shea, even though I see him more as a combo. But for Zaire, he's more, like right now at least, more of a complementary piece. But again, I like his athleticism for his size. I think you look at guys like Oladipo and Josh Richardson, not saying he is those guys, but as far as size and athleticism traits and his work ethic, you could see him improving at a rate that you don't normally find in prospects.
Would you take him or Lonnie Walker?
Oh, definitely Zaire.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder, like with Lonnie, if I am a little bit too high in kind of evaluating him based off of what we saw in high school, a little bit more than what we saw in college. But I think that there are also the knee issues there. Would you rather have Zaire or Kevin Knox?
Zaire.
Okay. Zaire Smith or Colin Sexton?
Zaire.
Yeah, you're losing your mind. This is going to be fun. This is going to be a really fun pre-draft process once the NBA playoffs slow down. Really, though, like the top I feel is pretty okay. Like we're going to have arguments about Mohamed Bamba. Like I can tell already that I'm falling in love with Mohamed Bamba again, with the jump shot and with the fact that he's working with Drew Hanlon. I'm going to go out and see him at some point here, maybe in the next couple weeks. But, DeAndre Ayton, we're going to have a fight over. We're going to have a fight over Luka Doncic. We're going to have a fight over Marvin Bagley. We've already had the fight over Marvin Bagley. This is going to be a great pre-draft process.
Hey, it's going to be entertaining, at least for the listeners. We'll get some different perspectives in here. The Bamba shot, man. You obviously saw the DX video? It looks completely different. Yeah,
he definitely lowered his shooting pocket a little bit, and because of that, it's coming out a lot smoother and more naturally. I'm telling you guys, like I can't emphasize enough that, like, having seen Drew Hanlon's work up close and having seen the detail-oriented way that he goes about training prospects and training players, I feel a lot more comfortable with players whenever they're with him. Like, I know that they're getting the best possible support and the best possible training.
And I feel much less comfortable about being skeptical of a player once they work with him. So you see the rewards with Tatum and stuff. So you have my full attention, sir.
Yeah. Let's move on. Let's talk about the NBA playoffs, though. We'll have enough time to talk about the NBA draft at some point. The first game we have to start with, I think, is Oklahoma City, Utah. That was a 71-46 Utah beatdown early in the third quarter, and then Russ kind of took over. Russ just decided, I'm going to outscore Utah the rest of the game, and he literally did. 33-20 or 33-30, 33-28, something like that. Just an absolutely ridiculous game from Russ. And I think that Oklahoma City actually made some really substantive adjustments that will make Game 6 very, very interesting. But before we get into those, what was just your overall impression of the Russell Westbrook 45-point, 15 rebound, 7 assist game?
Just an absolutely wild game. I don't think I've ever seen a star go from 0 to 100 that quickly. We're not just talking about one game. We're talking about, for the majority of the series, Westbrook has played below expectation level. And all of a sudden, he just hit another gear and went to 100, as you would say, full stop, in probably 5 seconds. And it was at the level where he was like an MVP caliber guy again. And he just absolutely took over the game. It's worth mentioning that some of this correlated with Rudy Gobert's foul trouble. That fourth foul is being heavily debated, I'll say, on Twitter right now, as far as the validity of it. And taking him out of the game, Westbrook and Paul George just ended up taking turns going to the rim. It was kind of a different approach there, but Westbrook was just fantastic. I mean, he got to the level that we all wanted to see him get at. We talked about multiple times on the podcast, the star level equity, the star level talent on the Thunder had to win out, and that's exactly what happened in the second half.
So, yeah, let's kind of just start with the adjustments. And I think that the biggest place that we saw adjustments were in the way that both of these teams played ball screens. Russell Westbrook started, instead of just to like aimlessly attack the rim against Rudy Gobert and aimlessly attack the rim against Derek Favors, started to pull up more. He had 23 points in the second half off of jump shots alone. He went 7 of 16 from the mid-range in this game, a lot of his damage coming from the right elbow. He went 5 of 9, I believe, from 3 in this game. That stuff scares me, but it also was a very real substantive change in terms of the way that they started to attack. And a lot of it came with Gobert on the floor. A lot of it came with Favors on the floor. It makes me think that this is going to be a strategy that Utah has to adjust to going forward.
It's pretty hard to adjust as well to pull-up threats. I mean, that's the one shot in the game I don't think you can
especially
ever really fully...
Russ.
Exactly. You can't really take that shot away. So when Russ is going that way and Utah's playing kind of an over and drop coverage where Gobert's sagging off, that's what he wants to do. He wants to play the rim and encourage those mid-range shots. When you have that going, when Paul George is executing at the level that he was, when Russ is executing at that level, you can't take that shot away. So we saw them get hot, especially with Gobert in the game. That's how they want to approach it, is maybe get as close as you can to the paint and then pull up. I mean, Paul George had that wicked step back 3, but for the most part, they really executed in the mid-range area. But when Gobert is out, you saw a completely different approach from Utah, and that's when they started that run, was when Gobert went to the bench and they just started relentlessly attacking the basket.
Yeah, but I guess for me, where I'm a little bit worried with Oklahoma City is that a lot of this did come at the basket, but a lot of it ultimately came, like 23 points from Russell Westbrook, came on him shooting 12 of 25 from the mid-range and from 3. And that does not seem sustainable to me with Russ. We have ample sample size at this stage that says he is not this good of a shooter. And I am worried that if they try and just make this what they do in Game 6 and Game 7, there's enough variance in shooting to where this can work. But it is also a bit terrifying, I think, for Oklahoma City, where they'll be playing with the fire that is Russell Westbrook's jump shot.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you can see that just in Gobert's minutes, 30 minutes on the floor, he was a +7. That is the minutes where they're taking predominantly jump shots. When he was on the floor, it's a different ball game, and they're going to have to shoot those shots to be effective. And that's kind of what we saw. It's kind of like a you and me approach that Paul George and Russell Westbrook take. It's much more individual, isolation-based basketball that just, again, depends largely on talent. Can they get hot and make these jump shots? And can they take advantage of the minutes with Gobert's off the floor? But he's not going to be off the floor to the same extent that he was in this game, likely because of foul trouble. So I agree with you. I think that it's dangerous to live by these shots, but I think that's what they have to do in this series if they're not going to get to the basket and finish at a high level.
So I think that it's also worth noting the way that they adjusted defensively in the way that they attack ball screens too. They essentially just started straight switching ball screens early in the third quarter, really I would say midway through the third quarter, and it coincided exactly with their run. That is a very interesting, bold strategy to me in a lot of ways, because they do have the scheme and the personnel to be able to accomplish this. You know, Steven Adams is good enough in space to where they can really not be in a mismatch scenario with him against Donovan Mitchell even. What is a little bit scary to me is I don't know how sustainable this is if they are set on playing Carmelo Anthony, and it seems like they're probably going to keep playing Melo pretty substantially in this series.
That's the key. I think the switching, they did so with Melo in the game, but it was more effective with Jeremy Grant in the game. That's when they really got in their run, because Grant can really move his feet laterally, and he's just an energizing force defensively that Carmelo can't bring. And you have to expect that Melo will continue to start just from pure politics. But it's not an accident that the Jazz started playing better when they switched more. The Thunder started playing better when they switched more, because the Jazz were carving them up in the first half. We saw, especially at the end of the first quarter, all those threes on lack of rotations, corner three-point shots, that they weren't switching. They were just kind of playing generally like help and recover kind of defense, and they were getting carved up. So I think the Thunder switching more, that forces the Jazz into their one main weakness, is the fact that only Donovan Mitchell was really a creation threat off the dribble at a high level. And if you switch everything, you force them into those situations. But you can't do that when you have Carmelo at the 4, because we saw the Jazz at the end of the game. They targeted Melo at times on like 2-4 pick and rolls. Donovan Mitchell can blow right by him. So that strategy is much more effective with Grant in the game, and I think that's something they really have to look at. I know it's politics. I know that you don't want to bench Carmelo, but if you want to win this series, I think that a main step is getting like someone like Jeremy Grant in at the 4 and playing to your strengths and playing to Utah's weaknesses.
Another thing that I think they did a little bit better in this game was handle the Joe Ingles problem better, because basically since Game 3, Ingles had been getting a lot of open shots. He gets that corner 3 open pretty regularly. He had to attack off the dribble a little bit more instead of getting open threes in this game than what we'd seen over the course of the last 2 games. And I think that really helps Oklahoma City's defense whenever Ingles has to kind of actually attack off the dribble instead of getting 45% look open threes.
You definitely want to run him off the 3-point line. You cannot give him those, space-eating open looks where it's uncontested. You just can't live that way. He's too good of a shooter, especially from the corners. So you want to get their offense moving more and have guys make pull-up shots. Like you want Rubio to take those shots, even if he is on fire, like we've seen earlier in the series. That's a percentage shot you want to live with. I think there's certain ways that the Thunder can maximize their chances to win this series. One of them is to take away the 3-ball, at least the best possible ability. Run these guys off the line.
Yep.
Again, that coincides more with switching and forcing these guys to beat you one-on-one. You want Utah to get out of their motion-type offense. You want them to stagnate the ball and then go one-on-one. You want them to isolate against you because they don't have enough guys that can do that. It's really just Mitchell, and they're relying on a rookie to generate those kind of points.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Donovan's really smart, and he's very quick at adjusting. But it was interesting to see what happened whenever Oklahoma City just put Alex Abrinas on him, because Alex is at least bigger and longer and also has some quickness. Like, he's not a quick player by any stretch, but he is at least able to battle a little bit with Mitchell whenever he's trying to just blow by and go to the rim.
It's really interesting how Oklahoma City went about this. Paul George started out guarding Donovan Mitchell, so you see a lot of Utah didn't want to cross-match back on the other end. That's why you saw more George match up with Mitchell, because they didn't want to switch in transition with Ingles onto him. That still happened in dead ball situations, but I think maybe Oklahoma City did that to keep George out of like the frustration level of dealing with Ingles the entire games. That's just something to look for, but I think that this is kind of fascinating overall. We've hit the nail kind of on the head, as in most guys have, as far as analyzing the series. It comes down to the individual talent versus, the scheme of Utah Jazz's offense. It just is going to be curious to see how far Oklahoma City is going to go into really maximizing their own strengths via, these lineup substitutions, putting Grant on the floor, and then playing the way that they did in the second half, which led to this comeback.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let's. I guess we should ask this question: do we think that the Thunder have actually figured something out here, or do we think it was a hot shooting night from Russell Westbrook?
I think it was more so the latter. I think they have figured some things out. It's just I don't feel confident to the extent that I need to that they're actually going to implore them and actually execute and put in a Jeremy Grant for Carmelo Anthony. I don't know if that's going to happen. We already saw some dissension on the bench as far as Melo wanting to come back in the game. Apparently, that was reported on Twitter, and there being some kind of altercation, not serious, but just verbal. I don't know. That's what it comes down to me, is can you offset the politics and just play to win this series? I think if the Thunder can do that, they definitely have a chance. It's going to rely some, like you said, on Russell Westbrook performing at a high level. Same with Paul George. They have to play this way for them to win. But I think also it comes down to schematics as well.
Yeah, I said after the last podcast, I think that Utah wins in 6, and I'm going to stick with that. Let's move on. Let's talk about the Cavs-Pacers game. Is there a point where we have to worry about just the Cavs not getting anything from anyone other than LeBron? Because it seems to be working so far, but these games have been much closer than they really need to be.
I'm worried. I mean, again, when your second most reliable player in the series is Kyle Korver, I'm a little concerned. I'm a huge Korver guy, but if he's your second best player, that's kind of disconcerting.
Yeah, and he played like their second best player last night.
Yes.
Very clearly. I said online that he was their third best player because I still think that Kevin Love is probably better than he is, but Kevin's been really bad in the last 2 games of this series, at least. Thaddeus Young is causing a lot of issues defensively. Even LeBron, he makes LeBron work for buckets. Bojan Bogdanovic is making LeBron work for buckets. He did a great job in the second half, I thought. But Thaddeus Young particularly is causing a lot of issues for Kevin Love. Kyle Korver's been really good. Obviously, he's knocking down 3-point looks, and whenever he does that, the Cavs are very, very difficult to beat. I think that their record whenever he makes over 4 threes in a game is 8-1. So whenever they're spacing the floor with Kyle Korver in the way that they are, it's much, much easier for them to get what they want at the rim. The funniest story I think I've ever heard about Kyle Korver, too, is I think Robbie Calland asked him about missing shots. And how quickly do you know that you missed a shot whenever you take a shot? And he goes, pretty much basically off the hand, I'll know if it's long or short. And and Robbie asked him, I think it was Robbie asked, what about left or right? And he goes, it's never left or right.
That's so great.
Yeah, just it doesn't matter. He knows exactly where the ball's going every time. It's just the amount of distance that he has on it. The Pacers at this stage are very clearly just a more well put together team. And the fact that they were able to keep this within 3 points whenever Victor Oladipo went 2 of 15 from the field and only had 12 points says a lot to me about the fact that they should feel relatively positive about where they're at.
I agree. And they're not getting the contributions from Victor that we're used to seeing. Of course, the Cavs are combating some of those looks by still trapping him in pick and roll. But I think Oladipo for the series now is 4 for 22 on jump shots in the half court off the dribble. He just doesn't have that threat of his pull up right now. And so when he can't get to the rim with these traps, it's just tough for him to have an impact offensively because they're trying to take him away and scheme against him. And he can't really combat that with his pull up jumper. So you see, last night, it was more like Sabonis types who had big games with 22 points, doing some stuff on the short rolls, taking advantage of some of the mismatches in the post. They just have a conglomerate of players that are really, really solid and know their roles and play within their respective lanes. I've been so impressed with Thaddeus Young in the series on both sides of the floor, mostly defensively on Love and kind of his rotations, his speed, I think is really underrated. But it's guys like that who are really making the difference, whereas the Cavs don't have enough of those ancillary players that are making an impact.
Yeah, and We need to talk about LeBron next, I think. The fact that we went this long not talking about LeBron is probably sacrilegious in many ways. Drops 44 points on 14 of 24 from the field. Yeah, you think he was 9 of 11 in the first half, just dominated, went wherever he went. 10 rebounds, 8 assists, was ridiculous. In the first half, he was the reason that they were even able to keep it within 7 points. He's the reason that they won this game. They basically won because they had LeBron. Like, no other player in the world could have gotten them to where they got in this game.
And this is the level where LeBron's at, is when it takes us 2 minutes into the conversation about the series to actually mention him, because it's so commonplace that he performs this way. Like, you just expect it. I mean, that shot to win the game, like, I thought that was going in. It's just LeBron, man. He's that damn good. Yeah. I know some people were like, this is a top 5 game from him of all time. That didn't even cross my mind. I didn't even consider it like the top 10. And that's crazy because it's LeBron. Like, it's this game for so many guys, 44 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists, the game-winning shot, the game-winning air quotes block that was actually a goaltend. Like, just a ridiculous performance down the stretch. And this is what we've come to expect from him. He delivers. He's delivered every stage of his career since he's been like 20 years old. And this is just another example of that. He carried the Cavs last night, made all the big plays down the stretch, and wasn't really getting a ton of help from both his team and from his coach. I thought that, Ty Lue left Jeff Green in the game a couple times late in the game, and nobody guards that guy. The help is always coming off him. When LeBron's trying to drive, you see second and third defenders. If that is Jose Calderon in the corner, that's an open 3-point look. Like that last possession where LeBron drove and then turned it over with the dribble. Like, I don't care if the result wasn't because wasn't because the Jeff Green was on the floor. Like, overall, Calderon, it's about the process of the choices. Calderon should have been on the floor to space the floor. Like that, this is a bizarre decision to me.
Yeah, and they stuck with bad JR. Like, JR has great nights and JR has bad nights. Last night was a particularly bad JR night, to where the Pacers could feel pretty confident just being like, okay, we know you don't have it tonight. He played 33 minutes last night, which was kind of crazy to me. But then again, I look at what Rodney Hood did, and Rodney Hood didn't really do anything either. And, do you feel good about having Jordan Clarkson on the floor? Not really. This roster is just so incredibly flawed that I can't. I mean, can you see a circumstance where they beat Toronto and like Philadelphia in the next two rounds?
Not really. But I give, again, the small percentage chance to LeBron. I just can't, pick against that guy for the most part because his performance is like last night. But on a surface level, no, I can't see it away. Those teams are just too well constructed. They have so much more talent on their roster overall. And their identity is so much more sound to me. Like, Cleveland still hasn't really found their precise identity. I think a lot of that is because of the personnel. But you're going against teams that really have a strong foundational concept of who they are, and they have the ancillary players to execute.
Yeah, like I keep mentioning this in every single like radio hit or on this podcast, every single like place that I talk, but they still haven't found their best lineup, I don't think. I mean, like the fact that George Hill is out is really hindering that. But now they've played 5 games and no lineup has played more than 35 minutes. So they're playing their like most used lineup 7 minutes a game. And that most used lineup is Jose Calderon, J.R. Smith, Kyle Korver, LeBron James, and Kevin Love. And it's a minus 5.1 in those 35 minutes. Like they've played very few lineups. I think I only see one lineup that they've played in 4 games. They've played Jordan Clarkson, Jeff Green, Rodney Hood, LeBron James, Larry Nance in 4 games in this series. And that's not exactly a lineup that you want out there regularly, I would say. It's just a very, very messy team, and they don't really know how to play well together. The good thing is that they have to hope that George Hill eventually comes back, because in the 2 games in the 33 minutes that George Hill, Kyle Korver, LeBron James, Kevin Love, and J.R. Smith have been on the floor, they have a 30.1 net rating. And that's really good. Like, that's actually very, very useful to be able to have a lineup where you can space the floor entirely around LeBron James. You have a guy in George Hill who can actually create off the dribble and get into the lane and actually make a smart pass once he gets there. It's just a very, very difficult situation for Ty Lue right now, but he's not really showering himself in glory by continuing to play Jeff Green whenever Jeff Green has just been abjectly terrible in many ways in this series.
And it speaks volumes that George Hill hasn't even been like an impact player. He's been fine, but fine for the Cavs is a huge win. as far as overall production. If they're just getting like adequate production from the position and somebody who knows where to be on the floor on both sides of the ball, just surrounding LeBron, that's huge.
Yeah, it's just being an adult.
Yes, that too. Just being a real no. But for the most part, I think that's exactly right. It's just they have so many guys that you can't trust on the floor in big minutes, and that's manifesting on the floor. It's tough, and I think that a guy like George Hill, at least you have that veteran presence. It does bear mentioning that I think in the second quarter, the Cavs bench was +1 overall with LeBron resting. I think that's huge. Yes. So those are the minutes where you expect the Pacers to absolutely railroad the Cavs, and the fact that they at least treaded water in those minutes was huge last night, because you have LeBron playing 42 minutes, and the energy level that he has to kind of come up with offensively, just being the engine, that's going to take a toll. So he has to rest. You have to give him, I mean, ideally he should be playing more like 38, 40 minutes a night instead of 42 to 46 like we've seen in the past in this series. But you have to get minutes with him resting, and you have to be able to tread water. And I thought they did that last night, at least in the first half. Yeah,
and you bring up the bench players. In this series so far, Larry Nance is a -7.2 per 100 possessions. Rodney Hood -6.4. Jeff Green -6.1. Jordan Clarkson -3.3. So that's a really great point. And those lineups particularly have been really bad defensively. You look at Clarkson, Hood, and Nance. They all have a defensive rating over 110 when no one else on the Cavs has a defensive rating over 104. They need to find a way to defend when LeBron is either off the floor or when the bench unit is on the floor, and LeBron might be taking like a small rest defensively because he has to do so much offensively for those units.
What do you think about, from the Pacers angle, the whole center dilemma here? Because I think in certain points of the series, Sabonis has been more valuable than Miles Turner on the floor, especially in situations where he has to create. Do you have any like long-term takeaways as far as just player archetypes, like with the draft or anything like that correlates to this?
Well, the big thing in this series, let's start in the series first. The big thing in this series is something that you mentioned on the podcast, I think on Monday. Sabonis killed them in short rolls. He is absolutely just perfect at finding that little space on the short roll, and he's a very good passer, so he can find the corner, or he can just go up to the rim and make a shot. He's 8 of 12 for 22 points last night. He had a pretty good game 4, if I remember correctly, with 19 points. So they found a little adjustment there with the way the Cavs are playing screens, and they're just kind of blitzing them, and it gives Sabonis a small chance to just kind of jump in there in the short roll and get the ball at the foul line and make a call. He's better at that for this specific series than what Turner is. And I understand why we would want to make a very grand scale question about Miles Turner, but I think it's more of an individual schematic thing than a large scale, we need to like reevaluate how we think about players thing. Because like something we know about the draft is that smart players who make good decisions and can finish at the basket are useful. Like Sabonis can do that, and Sabonis can move his feet defensively relatively well too. Like those guys are valuable. We know that guys who can shoot threes and who can protect the rim and, you know, hopefully create their own shot a little bit in Turner's case from like the mid post, those guys are valuable too. I just think that in this specific series, it makes more sense for Sabonis to be in the game a large portion of the time.
Yeah, for me, I think that's 100% right. It's just, we've talked about this on past podcasts. It's important to be multiple in your lineups and have on your roster flexibility in different skill sets. And I think this is a perfect example of that. You have different kinds of centers you can play depending on the matchup. You can adapt to what Cleveland's trying to do. So you have more of a playmaker, short roll guy like Sabonis who can put the ball on the floor a little bit, pass on the move, can also space. But then you have Turner who's more the rim protector. And in this series, I think a lot of the matchups and a lot of the scheme that the Cavs are employing against the Pacers mandates someone like Sabonis who can actually put the ball on the floor and make decisions on 4 and 3 advantage situations. So I think it just speaks to the larger point of you want to have flexibility and different functionality skill sets on your roster. I think this is a perfect example of that.
I think that's a great point. Do we think the Cavs win this now that they're up 3-2?
I mean, again, I can't pick against LeBron in a series like this. It's tough. I'm going to go Cavs. I think it could go 7 though. Like, I would not shock me at all if the Pacers won Game 6.
I think it's going to go 7. I think I will go with LeBron. The math is just in their favor at this stage, being in a 2-game sample where they only have to win 1. Let's talk about Raptors Wizards, I'm really struggling with this series. I just don't care. Like, I understand that, like, the Raptors are really fun and I've really enjoyed them throughout the course of the regular season. I understand that we're getting just an absolutely incredible John Wall performance in this series. Like, he is carrying these dudes on his back every single night. I just don't like. It's a messy series. It's just so ugly in so many ways because Toronto is playing down to the slop that has been Washington all year.
Pretty much that. And I usually just pay attention to specific matchups. I kind of want to see like the adjustments being made. OG started on John Wall in this game, trying to give him more issues there. Lowry on Bradley Beal. But for the most part, I think this just comes down to execution. Overall, we've kind of seen the hands of both teams at this point and how they're going to match up and how they're going to dictate and like approach different lineups. Like for bench units, both these teams had all 5 bench guys on the floor to start the second quarter. I think Toronto was a +2 in those 4 minutes. So we see a similar dynamic there being employed. I just think it comes down to who makes more shots and who can execute better down the stretch, because we saw the Wizards. They couldn't make a 3 down the stretch. They missed a ton of shots, and that was the difference in the game. Like, this was a really competitive game until very, very late. As far as the Raptors needed Daylon Wright in the fourth quarter to have a big burst offensively. And I think that's what this series is going to be. It's going to come down to how these teams perform down the stretch and how their stars react in the moment. And while that's entertaining, I don't know if this series, as far as just overall interest and entertainment, is at the level of some of the other ones.
So yeah, let's start and kind of focus a lot of our attention on Toronto, I guess, because DeMar DeRozan for the first 3 quarters of this game was absolutely incredible. He was like a top 12 player in the world in the first 3 quarters of this series. And, I think you could probably say similarly in game 4, and you could say similarly in game 2. Why is he not being as effective in the fourth quarter as he has been throughout the course of the rest of the game, do you think?
It's a great question. I think all Raptors fans are probably wondering that as well. I mean, that just falls right into the narrative of Lowry and DeRozan kind of coming up short historically in the playoffs. And I think in the big moments, I don't really have a good explanation for this, as far as I don't think it's like scheme related. I mean, at the end of game 5, it was a lot of isolation based basketball, or game 4, whatever it was. And like that was kind of the negative there is there's a lot of clear out, pick and roll stuff, isolation based, attacking kind of smaller players. And that's not how the Raptors want to play. That's not how they've played this year. But as far as actually producing and DeMar kind of falling off in the fourth quarter, I really don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, it's a very, very strange phenomenon to me as well. I will say that I've really, really liked what both he and Kyle Lowry, for the most part, have done in the series, creating for their teammates. Kyle Lowry has at least 8 assists in 4 of the 5 games. DeMar DeRozan has at least 4 assists in every game in this series as a scorer. They've done a better job throughout the course of the first 3 quarters, both of them. Kyle has been a little bit better in the fourth at this as well, of using the gravity that defenses have to send their way, and the attention that defenses have to send their way, and allowing it to create for their teammates, like a DeLon Wright, who was awesome in this game. He got open shots and knocked them down when necessary.
I totally agree with that. And I think that for the Wizards, conversely, they rely more on getting out in transition. You saw Scotty Brooks at halftime talk about the importance of transition threes, and I thought they did that really well in the third quarter. They just couldn't do it late. I think both teams are kind of playing to their strengths, at least in most parts of the game, until Toronto, for some reason, collapses late offensively. Usually, I mean, in this game, they still produced, and it was the Wizards who collapsed. They just couldn't. I mean, they generated quality looks with threes. They just couldn't, knock down shots.
Both teams kind of collapsed a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. That's definitely fair. I was trying to be somewhat courteous of the matchup because it seems like we're kind of railing this overall series, and I think that's, to some point, that's fair. But yeah, I think for me, like down the stretch, we saw the Wizards closing with Markieff at the 5, which is kind of interesting compared to like their effectiveness with Mike Scott at the 5. So they traded that off in this series or in this game. And then you saw Toronto respond with Valanciunas down the stretch, which was kind of weird for me to see. What do you think about that? Yeah,
that's one thing that I have on my notes here. He's been really good in general in this series. And I don't think that Markieff is like enough of a matchup problem to necessitate keeping Jonas off of the floor.
Great point.
Yeah, like he is too prone to taking really, really shitty jump shots and too prone to being inefficient. And if that's going to be the case, you can just kind of hide Jonas on him, and you can kill them on the glass, which Washington throughout the course of this game really, really hurt the Raptors on the glass. I think that they were plus 18 in terms of rebounding margin, which isn't a great sample, but given the fact that the game was close, actually is a relatively decent barometer in this game, in my opinion. Toronto actually out-rebounded Washington in the fourth quarter in this game, and I think in large part it did have to do with them going back to Jonas and just deciding, you know what, we're going to live with what they do offensively against Valanciunas, and we're going to put him on Keefe and just kind of roll with it. And it ultimately worked out for Toronto. I think they were able to get the stops they needed, particularly, and they were able to, have DeLon Wright have a really, really great fourth quarter. And Jonas also had a really good fourth quarter during his stint, I thought.
I think those are two great points as far as the matchup with Markieff, putting Valanciunas on him. You don't have to worry as much about Markieff as a shooting threat, as a popping threat. So the gravity isn't great. They're leaving him open for the most part anyway. I can't remember who tweeted this about the rebounding advantage, but with Valanciunas in the game, it was considerably more even than it was with him out. So I think that's probably the adjustment that Casey made, was just sticking Valanciunas out there because I needed him on the glass on both sides. And that ended up paying off because the trade-off wasn't dire. Like if it was Mike Scott, I would have thought twice about it just because of the way he's shooting the ball. And I don't know if you can have Valanciunas in the game and give up an open three every single possession likely. But with Markieff in, you're already surrendering those shots to him anyway. So why not try to win the trade-off on the glass?
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% right. Do we think that Toronto closes this out in 6?
I think the Wizards actually win Game 6. I think that the way Wall's been playing on their home court, I think they close the deal, or they don't close the deal, they extend the deal, and then Raptors win in Game 7. What do you think?
I think that's probably the most fair assessment. John Wall, we haven't talked enough about him. He has been just absolutely ridiculous in this series. He has no fewer than 23 points in any game, no fewer than 9 assists in any game. Last night, he got a little bit loose with the turnovers. He got a little bit loose with the ball, but I don't care. We're seeing just an absolutely ridiculous John Wall performance in this series, and he deserves all of the credit in the world, all of the credit in the books for keeping Washington in this series in any way, because without him, this would have been a sweep.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's been phenomenal. The only thing you can bitch about last night really is the turnovers. And it's worth mentioning, too, that the Wizards are throwing different looks at him. Like I said, they started OG on him in this game. They're kind of rotating through some defenders and giving him just different approaches. And he's answered the call every time. He's performed, he's produced, and he's the reason that the Wizards are even in the series in general.
No question there. We're going to talk about Milwaukee and Boston very quickly because they play tonight. We're going to get a place where this is, I guess, not necessarily all that valuable podcasting part, given the fact that this is going to be released like 5 hours before the game starts. But I do want to note the Marcus Smart addition to Boston. Marcus Smart has just been a massive inclusion to what Boston wants to do. He swung game 5 for them, in my opinion.
I'm with you. I think his defense, his team defense, he just impacts plays. Like him on the weak side, rotating down and kind of challenging some of these dives to the rim that Milwaukee does. Like he can interrupt plays that way. He can block shots and just deflect balls that are like pretty much surefire baskets if it wasn't for him. So having him on the floor, it's also worth noting that Semi Ojeleye started this game, and Boston kind of changed their approach. Like Ojeleye was guarding Giannis. I thought he did a pretty damn good job on him, at least containing him for the most part. He can cut off his angles, and he's strong enough to hold position. And you saw Stevens alter his approach. Now he's trying to space out Milwaukee's defense because we saw the impact Thon Makers made on the interior blocking shots. So now he's spreading them out, getting more three-point looks. In this game, a lot of it just came down for me to the fact that the Bucks missed a ton of shots. I think Tony Snell had 5 open trail threes in this game, and he missed all 5. They were 9 of 33 from behind the arc. If they knock down a couple more, I think they win this game, frankly. But I like the adjustment that Stevens made. I think that was really smart. And I think Ojeleye has actually defended Giannis pretty well. Even though he's not giving them a ton offensively, he's really just a spot-up threat. But if he can knock down some threes and he can defend it at a high level, I think this is the exact kind of matchup that he can be valuable in.
Yeah, Shimmy's not giving them anything offensively, I don't think. That's fine, though. If he's going to at least fight with Giannis and make his life more difficult, that helps a lot. And then we obviously got the just awful Eric Bledsoe game again. Like, he has been awful in every way in this series, to the point, like, I guess Milwaukee has to keep him and hope for like a contract year bounce next year. But like, I don't know if I feel confident with him, with these guys going forward, just because he's a screen magnet and they need a guy who can actually defend point guards whenever Giannis is in the game. I think that's almost like point number one for a point guard, is being able to shoot and defend. And Bledsoe really does neither at this stage of his career. Exactly.
You want a 3-and-D plus kind of point guard around Giannis, because he's going to be handling the ball a lot. So is Middleton. You want a guy who has shooting gravity, and Bledsoe just doesn't have that. He's been brutal in this series. And next year will be a big year for him. I don't think Milwaukee should be the team that signs him to his next contract. I think that's a really dangerous proposition for basically any team, but especially for the Bucks, just because they do have such an established window here with Giannis. They have Middleton. They got to win. They got to put down the best roster. They have to build around their actual star caliber players. And I do not think at this juncture that Bledsoe is that guy.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. What did you make of Thon Maker in this game as well? Because he really, really, really struggled after playing extremely well in games 3 and 4. I kind of have a theory that makes sense in my mind, but might not make all that much sense overall.
Well, let's hear it.
So my theory is that part of the reason he struggled is that the Shimmy Ojale adjustment to the starting lineup meant that Aaron Baines went to the bench. And when Baines went to the bench, he started to match up more with Maker on the bench units and kind of in those lineups against him. And Baines can actually cause issues for Thon Maker with strength and with power and with rebounding. And I think that's what we saw with Maker. He got a little bit flustered with the lack of like core strength that he has as compared to Aaron Baines. And Baines just kind of pushed him all over the place, and it led to foul trouble.
I like that. I was going to say he fouled out. I thought he struggled, and that was kind of predictable. We talked about, the role players playing better at home. Hopefully that reverses in Game 6 tonight, and you see Maker have more of an impact, even though it's going to be harder now because Boston isn't concentrating their offense so much with two bigs. It's more spread out, so Maker has to cover more ground, which he is adept at. He moves his feet very well. It's just, can he have the same kind of rim protection impact in this game? It's worth noting also that Jabari Parker was again effective, 17 points, 8 rebounds. Very, very big for the Bucks. That's a huge understatement. If he can give them, positive minutes off the bench, that's huge.
Yeah, and we've talked enough about Chris Middleton being just incredible in this series as well. I don't know if we need to dwell on it, but I think you can make the case that he has been like one of the 2 or 3 best second bananas of any player in any series. Basically, you can look at like Drew Holiday to Anthony Davis as being incredible, but like I think Middleton has outplayed Bradley Beal. I think he's outplayed anyone on Boston that you want to consider a second banana. Anyone on the Cavs, anyone on the Pacers. Maybe Oklahoma City with Paul George is a little bit better, but he's just been absolutely incredible in this series.
And we just see the value again of being a wing who can shoot over the top defensively on smaller guys. Like they run the 2-1 pick and roll. He can just shoot over the top of these Boston guards. He can shoot over the top of even Tatum and Brown at times. That high release point at 6'8", just a really devastating weapon in the playoffs.
No question there. Let's move on, but before we do that, RX Bar is a whole food protein bar. Their bars are made with 100% whole ingredients. They want to be transparent and upfront with their customers, which is why they label the core ingredients on the front of the package and the ingredients that make up the texture and taste on the back. Beyond being a go-to snack that checks off a number of nutritional boxes, RX Bars actually tastes delicious. They found creating a bar made from real whole food ingredients actually tastes better than anything else out there. They don't need fillers, additives, chemicals, or added sugar. They just give you the bar and they give you the natural ingredients, and the bars taste absolutely terrific. They started in 2013. They called BS on protein bars. They could not find a bar out there that wasn't full of artificial ingredients, fillers, preservatives, general BS. So they set out to create a bar with a few simple, clean ingredients where every ingredient serves a purpose. Their core ingredients do all of the talking. It's simply like eating 3 eggs or 3 egg whites, 2 dates, and 6 almonds with 0 BS added. It turns out that real food ingredients actually taste good. You can taste the cacao, you can taste the real fruit, the spices, whether you want sweet or savory, chocolate or fruit flavors. There is an RX bar for you because they come in 11 delicious varieties. Again, no added sugar, no artificial colors, flavors, preservatives, or fillers. You can use it as breakfast on the go, a snack at the office. You can throw it in your bag for a plane ride if you got one coming up. It can even be a pre or post workout snack because of the protein that is in there. I enjoy all of them. I'm a big fan of the mint chocolate chip flavor. They are just absolutely spectacular in my opinion. I use them and eat them daily. My listeners can get your first order of RX Bar for 25% off, and I would fully endorse this product. It is a great deal for you. You visit rxbar.com/game theory. That's GAMETHEORY. Go to rxbar.com/game theory and enter that promo code at checkout as well, and you'll be able to get 25% off of your first order. It comes with a nice variety of flavors where you'll be able to trust and try everything that they have to offer. So give that a try. Again, rxbar.com/game theory and enter that promo code game theory at checkout. Let's talk about some postmortems, Cole. It's time to say goodbye to San Antonio, Minnesota, and Miami. Which one of those three do you want to start with?
I think we got to start with the Spurs. I think they're the most fascinating to me.
They probably play the biggest role over the course of the offseason, right? I think
exactly.
that's pretty clear just due to the Kawhi Leonard situation. It's basically impossible to tell which way that's going to go down, though, right?
I definitely don't have a good idea. I mean, it could go so many different ways. I think that the trade possibilities are absolutely fascinating that we've covered probably, 5-6 podcasts ago about different options. I think you'll see maybe the Sixers get involved, the Lakers, the Celtics. There's going to be a market for him if the Spurs are willing to deal. We also have the contract predicament to work with. And on top of just Kawhi, this seems like kind of a natural transitioning point for the Spurs overall. You have guys like Danny Green who have a player option for $10 million. You expect him to opt out. Rudy Gay, player option for about $8.8 million. What does he do? Joffrey Laverne to a much lesser extent. But Tony Parker's a free agent. Manu could retire. This could be a completely different Spurs team next year.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. And I am fascinated to see what San Antonio decides to do this offseason, because they could, realistically find, multiple lottery picks at some point with a Kawhi Leonard trade. They could find multiple young players. What do you think that they should be looking for most in a trade of this magnitude, if it is to happen? And how do you think they should go about making the decision as to whether or not Kawhi becomes a long-term part of their plans?
I mean, you got to calibrate the relationship and see where Kawhi is at first and foremost and what his desires are. I think he's at an age where he's in his prime, but I don't know if the Spurs can construct a contender in his time frame. I don't know if they're going to have enough cap flexibility or enough trade assets to really surround him. So this just looks like a scenario where they look and they self-evaluate and say, maybe we want to build for the future. And Kawhi is probably at his pinnacle, not necessarily at this very moment because he hasn't played, but he's probably at his pinnacle as far as, at least in his career, value-wise. We could trade him for an impact young prospect, which I would try to get. Maybe one that's a little bit more established. I mean, you're not going to get like a Donovan Mitchell, of course, but Philadelphia just, to me, makes a ton of sense because of how further along on their timeline than we maybe expected already. Like, they're already a legit finals contender. Yeah. If they add Kawhi Leonard to that roster, like we've talked about before, mixing him with Covington, Embiid, Simmons, that just gives them all of the size and just makes them a matchup nightmare. And they actually have the assets via Markelle Fultz, potentially the number 1 draft pick this year in like the 10-11 range that could be like a Mikal Bridges for the Spurs. There's a lot of options that could be alluring to San Antonio and kind of meet their transition. You have DeJounte Murray, who's really their primary young piece. I like Derek White a lot too, but those two guys in conjunction with another first-round pick, it seems like a natural transitioning period. And there's actually teams right now that can compete in the East that have the assets to get a deal done. Yeah,
I think basically every Eastern Conference team should be like, yeah, let's get in the Kawhi sweepstakes if we can, because he could legit swing that conference for you. Any team that is from, like, does he swing the conference for Indiana? Like, he really might.
God, that's a great question. Does Indiana have anything they can trade for him that's like super valuable? I mean, would they trade Miles Turner?
I was going to say, if you're getting Kawhi Leonard, you'd probably trade Miles Turner, right?
I would personally. I think that'd be a great move. It's just, does Indiana feel like they can keep Kawhi long term? Because that's also a factor in this calculus with his, I think, a player option after next season, if I recall. Yep. And you really have to have a competitive environment and feel good about taking the risk. Like certain GMs, like Daryl Morey, would easily take the risk, right? Like that's his MO.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure if some of these GMs would, considering, Turner, you have under cost control, you have under team control via restricted free agency. Would they feel that great about Kawhi? Would he be able to move the needle enough?
Yeah, I think any team in the East that is anywhere near contending, like Milwaukee, he would move the needle for Milwaukee pretty substantially.
Oh, God, yes.
He would move the needle for Washington pretty substantially. Like, is there a team in the East that he wouldn't push toward the top of the league that made the playoffs this year?
I don't think so. I think that's a spot-on assessment. It just comes down to their risk assessment, and do they think that Kawhi would actually make them, like, the favorite? Like, for Philadelphia, he would make them the favorite, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
That's what justifies the move more for a team like that. Same with Boston. They could congregate enough assets to make them the favorite as well. I think that those teams have more incentive because it looks, at least on surface level, like he would legitimately move the needle to not only a competitor or maybe atop that, but like the team in the East.
So, but like if you're Miami even, and you offer Josh Richardson, Bam Adebayo, and like, well, I guess that they can't offer multiple first-round picks because they're still like way out in terms of what they owe. But yeah, I guess Miami doesn't really have a great opportunity for this, do they?
But I follow your train of thought as far as I would absolutely do that if I was Miami. I mean, they're also capped out. They really don't have a mechanism to improve. And we saw in the series against the Sixers, they just don't have the top level talent. But they should absolutely make a bid. I think that they could be outbid pretty easily by the Celtics and the Sixers especially. It's interesting though. Like, what do you think? We've talked about this in the past, but if you're the Lakers, would you still consider this, especially if Oklahoma City loses in the first round, and then you could pair potentially Kawhi Leonard with Paul George in free agency? That seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yes, if you could get Paul George for free in free agency, and you could get Kawhi Leonard for like Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma, and a first round pick, yes, you do that. Or like if you get Lonzo or something like that, I don't know. Or you could try and pair LeBron James with Kawhi Leonard too. That seems useful.
It seems pretty useful.
Yeah, like if you could do, instead of Brandon Ingram, if you do Lonzo Ball, Kyle Kuzma, and a first for Kawhi Leonard, and then you get LeBron, you get Kawhi, you then have Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle, and who else? Like Josh Hart. That's actually a really good team next year, I think.
That'd be fantastic. I mean, again, I think that, Lonzo and Josh Hart, those are the kind of the players that amplify even better players. So that's a great fit. I think that it's definitely worth discussing that at least briefly, but I think the lure mostly comes in the East because you can see the clear avenues to actual competing in the finals. Like you can't really in the West right now with the Warriors and the Rockets, but in the East it makes a lot more sense because of course the Cavs are on the precipice of kind of decline. They don't have the infrastructure, and who knows if LeBron even stays. But if you're the Sixers, I think that I always turn my attention to them because now they are like the legit next in line in the East. Like they have the clearest trajectory, and if they can get Kawhi Leonard, like they could be in the finals for the next like 3-4 years.
So San Antonio could end up having a decent amount of cap space this summer, something like depending on what Danny Green and Rudy Gay do, like they could end up at something like $25 million in cap space this summer. How do they even go about like building this? I guess a lot of it depends on the Kawhi Leonard deal, but like what else do they need, do you think, to kind of keep this going? If they even, let's say like they decide to keep Kawhi. I think if they don't keep Kawhi, this is obviously a pretty big rebuild, but let's say that they do keep Kawhi, where else are they looking?
It's really tough because I think they need a guy like Danny Green. So if he opts out and they lose him, you need another two-way wing because that's their biggest problem in the Golden State series. Of course, outside of not having Kawhi Leonard, was the fact they didn't have enough two-way guys. It was more, DeJounte Murray is a defense. He's an excellent, outstanding defensive player. He's a liability offensively against the best teams. Patty Mills is a good offensive player, a bad defensive player. So can you get another 3-and-D kind of wing when every team in the league covets that? You already have one of the best ones in Danny Green. So yeah, they definitely could have cap space, and I expect Green to probably opt out. But if you lose him, like you need another player like that, right?
Yeah, no, I think that they need a lot of players like that, to be honest. They need to find a way off of the Pau Gasol money. I think they need to find a way off of the point guard position that they currently have that's one way. Like in my mock draft today, I mocked them Aaron Holiday because I was just like, okay, they need someone who could be a really good fit with DeJounte Murray in the backcourt who also plays both sides of the floor. That makes perfect sense to me. With Kawhi and LaMarcus, it seems like those are the two pieces that you're building with going forward. If you can find a way to like use a first round pick to offload Pau Gasol and then also, end up losing Rudy Gay and Danny Green or something, like say that you re-sign Danny Green to, 3 years, $36 million or something like that, which I think would be a reasonable deal for him. I don't know if that marketplace is out there for him though. So you might not even have to give up that much money. If you can still get rid of the Powell money, you're actually going to have cap space basically regardless of this. And you could actually make a dent with the way that you can spend that money.
Well, I mean, the obvious thing, I'm not even sure if this is in their calculus, but they could present like a viable option for LeBron. If they were able to shed Pau Gasol, if they could shed Edric's salary, like agree to a deal with Danny Green, you could bring in LeBron to that team if Kawhi stays, and you have the infrastructure to make a competitive case for LeBron. I mean, you're dealing with other teams like the Lakers. They might not have anybody else. I mean, if they don't get Paul George. So that's always where I thought it made the most sense for LeBron to go. I'm not sure if he could operate with Greg Popovich in that kind of scheme or if he'd want to go to San Antonio. I think that's kind of probably not the case from what I've derived from other people, is that he wouldn't consider San Antonio. But that might be the option, of course. I mean, getting the best player in the league is going to benefit you the most short term. But if they're actually still aligning on this current timeline with LaMarcus, with Kawhi, maybe that's the move.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone would like LeBron, and it's ultimately going to be a situation where we need to find a better option. But like realistically, it's worth exploring the fact that they can open up real cap space for someone like Paul George, or they can open up, like, should they be significant players on the restricted free agency market? Like, is it worth it for them to give up Pau Gasol and a first round pick to get off of that salary? If that was to happen, they'd be at $62 million guaranteed with $18 million out there still. So they'd have like $20 million to play with in cap space. After the cap holds and everything, they get rid of them. So do you make like a 4-year, $75 million offer to Aaron Gordon?
I was just going to ask that. I was going to include Aaron Gordon because I think that he offers them some two-way versatility at the combo forward spot. I think I would. I mean, the rules are less restrictive now as far as tying up cap space for a certain amount of time, and it's all about opportunity cost to me. Like, what are they really missing in free agency if they tie up their cap room to restricted free agent? I don't know. Like, is there another guy in this market that really moves the needle for them, especially fitting like dual timelines, so competing now but also building towards the future? So that's going to be how they have to go about this, is really evaluating all the separate options that are available to them. But even Aaron Gordon is probably not moving. He's not moving the needle in the short term. Like, that doesn't make them better than Golden State or Houston. But maybe they build for the next timeline after those those teams lapse. Like, that's going to be the tricky part here.
Yeah, that's kind of my theory for them. Just be the next team after Golden State.
Yeah.
Like an Aaron Gordon helps you there. Who else would help them there? That's actually a really good question.
I was going to say.
does Marcus Smart help them?
He definitely helps them. I think that he's the kind of player that would be super useful, and I think Popovich would definitely maximize that guy, as Brad Stevens has, but I don't think he helps them enough short term, clearly. I mean, I don't know if there is a player in free agency outside of the top level unrestricted guys that are really going to move the needle for you short term, if that makes sense. An
interesting one for me with them would be Dante Exum. If they make a restricted free agency offer that's like way over market value, pair him with, he'd have like insulation there with Patty Mills from Australia. Like, I'm sure he'd be pretty amenable to that. Obviously, he'd be playing for the Spurs, which would be really good too. That seems interesting to me. Make like an offer at Dante Exum and pair him with DeJounte Murray and just have like hyper long, hyper defensive team.
Did you see that Haralabob compared him to Bambi on Blow? That's pretty great. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting. Exum's going to be really fascinating to me because you can still see the flashes of upside. I think that he needs to really get his finishing under control. I know historically he's been a good finisher, but it just seems like, deceleration, all this stuff. I'm not really sure what role he plays on a competitive team, but he does have the upside. He does have the athleticism and the two-way ability that is intriguing to a team like and a coach like Popovich. I think that's a really interesting gamble.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Let's move on. Let's talk about Minnesota next. So Minnesota is in an interesting place because they have Jimmy Butler on an expiring contract next year. They have Andrew Wiggins signed long-term to max money. They have Karl Towns signed long-term just due to his restricted free agency rights. So given Thibodeau's just general affinity for Jimmy Butler, I would imagine that this is not going to end with them trading Jimmy Butler in the offseason because he's an unrestricted free agent in 2019. So you're basically trying to fill out the roster around Jimmy Butler, Andrew Wiggins, Karl Towns, and let's be honest, probably Taj Gibson too, because I don't think Thibodeau is getting rid of Taj Gibson either. How do we think they go about that? They really don't have much in terms of flexibility this summer.
They have 5 guys that are making over $14 million next year. It starts with Taj Gibson at 14. Jeff Teague is at 19. Jimmy Butler, 20. Andrew Wiggins, of course, 25. Gorgie Dang is making 15-1. What kind of flexibility do they really have? I mean, they could be in luxury tax and they could be like borderline on the apron, depending on what they do. I'm not sure exactly if they re-sign Bjelica, how they operate in that regard. So that would limit them to a lesser mid-level. That's really the only avenue they have as far as spending mechanisms, unless they kind of come up with a trade. And I don't really see who they really going to trade that's realistic. They can't trade Jimmy Butler. He was a top 12, top 10 player this year. If they don't have him, they don't compete at all. They don't make the playoffs.
As
they
we
want to
saw
make
throughout the regular season.
Exactly. So they can't trade him. They're not going to trade Wiggins, likely, just for politics. And
they just
I don't know.
They're not going to trade him.
Exactly. Politics just signed him, and is another team really going to give up what they think Wiggins is obviously worth based on pedigree? They have to sign Towns long-term eventually. That's going to be a max contract, of course. And that leaves you with Jeff Teague, Gorgie Dang, and Taj Gibson as your big contract guys. Taj Gibson is an expiring contract, so maybe you can pair him with a young guy like Justin Patton and a first-round pick. Is that getting you anything that's of value that really moves the needle for you?
Nope.
Exactly.
Just no. I will say they have the Cole Aldrich expiring contract that is, they have, I want to say $5 million in salary relief that they can offer a team because he has $2 million guaranteed in 2018-19 on a $7 million salary. So they could maybe use that to give a team salary relief and use it to match salaries on an $8 million player. That would allow them to add someone potentially, and then also add someone again in free agency for the mid-level exception. But they will have likely the taxpayer mid-level exception, not the more expensive $8 million mid-level exception this summer, it would seem. So they're in a tricky spot right now. Jamal Crawford has a player option for next year. Why you would offer a 40-year-old Jamal Crawford a player option a year down the road is bananas to me. Nemanja Bjelica is a free agent this summer, and he was actually fairly important for them this year. I don't know what they do with him because can you really expend $5 million a year on him given what your salary structure is?
Exactly. The way their roster is constructed from a trade perspective, I think they make the most sense for a Blake Griffin kind of trade where they have the bigger contracts and maybe they assume more long-term money, even though they're already going to be up against it with all these. Idea. But so I was thinking about that. I'm looking at a list of teams. I'm not sure who really stands out. Denver, maybe if they're this is not the same caliber of player, but say they're the Millsap thing didn't work. Maybe we can get in on a Kevin Love kind of trade, put him next to Nikola Jokic, and then you take Millsap and you have the matching kind of salaries to do that. Millsap becomes really interesting with Tibbs. I think he would really like that move. But I don't really know. Is there another star caliber player in the league that sticks out to you in this kind of trade?
Not really.
Yeah.
It's I don't think the Pistons are trading Blake Griffin just right now, straight up. You read all of these things about how he's taken a leadership role already with Detroit, and he's their guy. He has usurped Andre Drummond, it seems is their guy. So I don't think that they're going to give him up. It gets hard. a bad team player who there's no way that they trade for Marc Gasol, right? And play Towns at the 4.
I just went to Memphis too, and I went the other way. I went with Conley potentially. But that same kind of thought process, that kind of bad team with some high level talent that's a riskier proposition. I don't know. Could they play Gasol and Towns together? I don't think that's obviously optimal. It's something to at least explore. That I think that's the kind of deal. It's going to be a longer term deal that the team isn't great. They're not on the same wavelength as far as timeline, and the Timberwolves have at least enough contract as far as just total lump sum money to trade for a higher salary deal like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like any of these options for them, to be honest.
I'm with you.
Yeah, they're in a tricky spot this summer. What do we think they need most? I mean, there's a very obvious answer to this in terms of 3-point shooting. Well, I would say 3-point shooting more than anything. They took the fewest 3-point jumpers in the NBA this season. They need guys who can actually step up and shoot. But a big question is how much of that is scheme versus not having shooters, and how much spacing can you really get whenever you start Jimmy Butler and Andrew Wiggins?
Exactly, and I think the kind of archetype I need is a 3-and-D guy that is lower usage but can play both sides of the floor. They have some shooting with guys like Jamal Crawford, but you're not getting any defense there. So it's just a lot of mismatched ancillary guys. Every team needs a 3-and-D wing for the most part. That's the kind of guy I would look at because you already have Jimmy Butler who commands the ball, Jeff Teague, Andrew Wiggins, Karl Towns. You just need somebody to kind of fill in the rest of the roster as far as bringing those small contributions. I shouldn't say small, but as far as production-wise, smaller, but contribute to winning basketball. I think they need somebody like that.
Could you get Danny Green to opt into his contract, do a sign and trade with Tyus Jones and the Cole Aldrich money?
I do like that. That's really good, actually. I think that's exactly the kind of player that they need.
And then, I don't think that you're going to have problems extending Danny Green under the rules, would you?
I don't think so, no. If a certain time elapsed, I think you have to let 6 months elapse or something like that for that rule, but I think it's easily doable. Or you just re-sign him. You have his bird rights in that case, and that's fine.
Yeah, but if you wanted to make sure you got him under contract long term,
Sure.
That actually makes a little bit of sense to me.
I really like that, actually. That's exactly the kind of player they need.
Yeah. I don't know if San Antonio would be amenable to that, but it seems like something that actually could be useful if they sneaky under the table agree to extending Danny Green at the time and saying hey, we're going to get you $10 million this year. You might not get $10 million on the market, but we're also going to extend you. We're going to give you, 3 extra years at $30 million. We're just going to give you that kind of money again. You'll be on another 4-year, $40 million deal. Does that make sense to you? I think it kind of does.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I was going to say really quick, the last maybe argument here, this is never going to happen, but it's just kind of interesting to think about with Tibbs. It's just, if everything goes bad with the Thunder and they just blow everything up, I think that at least the Timberwolves will make a call for Russell Westbrook. And I think they at least have the contracts. They don't have really the assets that Oklahoma City would look for, but I could definitely see Tibbs doing that.
There's no way Oklahoma City's trading Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But I mean, worst case scenario, there's probably a 1 to 5% chance that happens.
Well, here's a better question. Do they make a call on Melo?
Oh, God. Oh, no, I hope not, but maybe.
Do you trade Gorgie Jang's money for Melo?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, just for long-term relief, and they're going to have to pay Towns. So from a pure economic standpoint and finances, I would think maybe, but I don't know. You're not – oh, God. I'm just too scared that Tibbs would start Melo at the 4 next to Towns, and I would literally not be able to watch a single Timberwolves game.
Let's be clear. He would, but at the same time, it's an interesting option for them that we both hate, but seems within the realm.
Yeah, that's a good way to sum it up.
Yeah. Let's talk about Miami. Miami can't really do anything with their roster unless they trade Hassan Whiteside. What kind of offers do you expect for Hassan Whiteside this summer?
I'm just curious on if teams are going to require an additional asset because they know that Miami's leverage is basically nil as far as their flexibility.
I would not take Hassan Whiteside unless you're giving me a first-round pick, at least.
I agree, especially because he is that player option after next season. So he's scheduled to make $27 million in 2019. 2
years, $52.4 million.
For a guy who can't really play in the playoffs effectively, I agree. I think it's definitely you have to view it as a negative asset at this point, correct?
It's definitely underwater, and I would say that contract is about $30 million underwater. Maybe not that much, maybe 25.
Is there a team that stands out as potentially interested in that trade, either from an asset acquisition standpoint of acquiring maybe an extra pick, or just a team that might just take him for free, even though I really highly doubt that? Maybe they move a worse contract to Miami. Does any team stand out as like a Hassan Whiteside destination?
Does Portland make sense if they decide to move on from Yusuf Nurkic?
God, they would have to unload a lot of salary in that deal because of their luxury tax implications, but that's possible.
But they have the Evan Turner money, though.
Evan Turner. Does Miami do that?
Maybe.
It's worth a call.
Yeah, and like you might not have to attach a pick if it's Turner.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's
like you could say, like, so if you're Miami, if you believe in Hassan Whiteside, if you're Portland, I think that would be the first step here. I don't know if they would necessarily, but you could say Evan Turner, and you could say some sort of just small money. Miami would be getting some salary relief for a team that is going to be capped out going forward. Portland would be getting a center that they would potentially believe in.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. Looking at the
general
landscape.
Let me be clear. I would not do that, but
yeah, I think I'm with you there too. I just don't see a lot of teams that are center needy. I mean, we're also in, like, considering this draft class too. Like, I don't. Where's the demand for Hassan Whiteside across the league? At least unless you're giving up a very significant asset. Miami is kind of limited as far as first round picks due to the Stepien rule, but I don't see a lot of these teams. Like, where's the huge need area? Like, maybe Dallas, but I think they have their sights set much higher in free agency.
Well, they have their sights set higher in free agency, and they're going to have access to one of these top players, like at the top of the draft. So, like, it almost has to be someone that does not have that kind of access to top players at the draft, and then also is, in need of a center for whatever reason. Like, Milwaukee is the team that gets sent this way a lot, and I don't like it.
I'd rather just play Giannis at the center, honestly, in the playoffs. Like, I don't know.
I would rather play Henson at the center for $10 million.
That's definitely fair. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. I guess the overall takeaway here is a Whiteside trade isn't clean. Like, there's not a lot of teams that this is a clear option for them that they'd actually pursue, especially for basketball reasons. I'm
looking hard right now. Like, could the Clippers do it if they lose DeAndre?
I think they'd value the cap space more, honestly. Like, we've seen I don't know. Like, I think that they would. I
think I agree with you. I just absolutely think they would value the cap space. Could Toronto, if they like flame out in the playoffs in the second round?
I mean, is Whiteside even that much of a upgrade over Jonas Valanciunas? I think they're pretty similar. I don't know. Like,
he's probably a little bit better because he's a better rim protector.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're only playing those guys small minutes, if they're not playing like 35 minutes in a playoff game and you're Toronto, and the only reason you'd probably make a move is to compete, at least conceptually, does that really move the needle enough for you?
Not for me, but I'm just throwing random shit at the wall. Like, it's hard.
Yeah, it is.
Again, I would not do this if I was Toronto. I think Miami's like stuck with him unless Portland comes to the table.
Maybe Charlotte, as far as a Dwight Howard kind of deal. I don't know why necessarily, but they seem to be grouped into this, even though they have all of the centers. But they're another team that's capped out. And so maybe you look at them and say, you could justify it from their vantage point, even though Howard is an expiring contract. I don't know. There's no clear option for me.
I am in on a Charlotte deal, if only because I know that we would get great Frank Kaminsky stories about Hassan Whiteside being in that locker room.
Yes, 100%.
Washington too, maybe?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think Gortat is kind of taking a step back. His screening is still super valuable, but he hasn't been that level of player. They have some dead contracts. I mean, they have Ian Mahinmi. If, Miami was amicable to taking him on or whatnot, there's some constructive ability there just because, again, the Wizards are also capped out, so their flexibility is very little.
Yeah, like is Jan Mahinmi and Jan Mahinmi enough?
God, this is getting depressing real quick, man.
Yeah, no, it's very bad. So, like, Miami, let's talk about what they can do realistically. They will have the mini mid-level, correct?
Yes.
They will have Wayne Ellington as a very actually important free agent for them to sign.
Very important.
Yeah, he's very good, but I wonder if he's going to get a better opportunity somewhere else where he can actually compete.
Could definitely be. I think that he is the exact kind of shooter that most contenders covet off the bench because he can flip a game because of his off-movement shooting, I think he'll get more competitive offers. And it's going to come down to financial flexibility because the Heat have, $116 million guaranteed already next season because we see that Tyler Johnson cap spike. That's going to be huge for them because it escalated from 5.8 this year due to this old escalation clause in the CBA that's not the case anymore. And it's 19.2 next year. $19.2 million for Tyler Johnson. He's the second highest paid player on the Heat now.
He's going to be getting more money than Goran Dragic.
Yeah. So I love Tyler Johnson, but I love him much more at 5.8 than I do at 19.2.
Yeah, I don't think that they can really get off that money at all. That contract is $14 million underwater the rest of the way. He's like a $5 million player.
On this market, probably. I think I could see him making up to maybe 8, and that's the higher end. But I think 5 to 8 is the approximate range. It's definitely not 19.2 though. You're underwater by at least $10 million or so.
Yeah, and that's hard. That's really hard whenever you're underwater by $22 million between Whiteside and Tyler Johnson next year, and that's not. I'd say the rest of their contracts are okay market value wise. Like James Johnson is probably a little bit overpaid, but he's still a really useful player who would make at least 10 to 12 on the market. Dion Waiters is a ready-made replacement essentially for Wayne Ellington in a totally different way, but at least positionally, he's a guy that will step in. Dwayne Wade, they're going to have to make a call on Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade's going to have to make a call on Dwayne Wade. I don't know. I don't know what this team does next year. I guess they're going to be on the market for a superstar trade. I just don't know what their assets are to make that superstar trade because of their lack of future picks that they can move.
Exactly that. And I think overall, just contractually, you look at this roster and where's the surplus value in these contracts? Everybody's at least market value or negative as far as being underwater, as you would say. There's no great contract that's adding a ton of value outside of Josh Richardson's the clear guy. I think he's their best player, and him making 9.3 next year that's a good deal. You're probably getting market value. He's probably 16 or 17. So I'll retract that statement. I think that Richardson's the one guy for me. Of course, Bam Adebayo being on a rookie scale contract, Justice Winslow, those guys are going to be valuable. But going back to your superstar trade idea, I think those are the two guys, right? Does a team like Justice Winslow enough? Do they like Bam Adebayo enough? Those are their two primary young key cogs. They can present a pretty formidable offer with Winslow, Adebayo, and Josh Richardson, but that absolutely eviscerates their future as far as their next timeline. So would they actually do that?
Well, and you know what I just realized too? After this draft, they can trade their 2019 first rounder.
Oh, that's right, because it would have to be unprotected, though, correct? Because they owe 2021 unprotected. So they couldn't do a top 5 protection so it could lapse and then be traded the next year because then that would violate the rule. Is that correct?
I'm sure there's a way around it, but yeah, essentially you would have to give it up unprotected. Not I wouldn't feel great about that, but depending on the superstar, I might be willing to at least entertain it.
Yeah. I think that's definitely an option. It depends on who the player is. If it's worth it and they feel like they could compete. And with these other teams like the Sixers, for example, you could see them probably at least entertaining an idea like that. I just think they're caught a little bit between a rock and the hard place. They went in on this roster entirely. They chose we're going to stay competitive while these other super teams exist and not completely bottom out. And they have no flexibility. And this is kind of who they are.
Yeah, I actually like a lot of the players on their roster. I like the idea of staying competitive in Miami with these guys, but they just did it on deals that make it a lot harder, I think. James Johnson, you could get off of that contract pretty easily, but I would imagine that a lot of guys in the NBA would like to have James Johnson on their team. Dion Waiters, I think you could probably get off of this contract with him at $12 million a year. Kelly Olynyk, you could definitely get off of that contract. I think that's
100%
basically a market value contract.
Yes.
Josh Richardson, obviously, you can get off of that contract. So they have movable deals for sure. It's just how much would they be moving of their competitive players that make them useful for a star?
Exactly right. I think short term, if they move too many of those guys, they're not going to be able to do what they want to do, which is be a cohesive team. And they rely so much on the interconnectedness between players. Their offensive system is more, relying guys coming off screens and more timing-based passing because they don't have the star power. And we saw that in the Sixers series. They just didn't have enough top-level talent to compete with Phillies. And that's an issue. That puts into perspective the fact that they're not going to compete for a title as currently constructed. They're far off, but they're also in a good position to make probably the playoffs consistently just because of their coach and how much cohesion they have on their roster. If that's the way they proceed, I think that's fine. I mean, that's their goal. Teams have different goals. Not every team is trying to win the title. Some teams just want to make the playoffs, gain extra revenue, and be competitive every year because coaches don't like to lose, and neither do players. But that's kind of what they are. They're the manifestation of that in the Eastern Conference as that competitive team, but not really true competitors.
Yeah, I mean, if they say that San Antonio loses Kawhi Leonard, should they be in the market for LaMarcus Aldridge?
I think they would be.
I think they should
honestly,
be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, they have... Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think that you could probably find a way to do this, to like actually make that deal happen. They actually might be in a better position than a lot of teams, I think, because I don't think that LaMarcus is going to get a wild amount of like younger assets and like awesome picks and stuff, but they have a lot of pieces in Josh Richardson and, as we mentioned, Justice Winslow and Bam Adebayo that kind of match with what his value is.
Agreed. I wouldn't trade too much if I was Miami. Like, I'd be pretty careful about dealing too many of those younger guys for LaMarcus because, again, he makes you more solid in the short term, but doesn't move the needle necessarily to the level that they're going to need to be at. But one of those guys potentially I could see along with a possible pick in the future. I think that's a fair deal, and that's the kind of deal they could pursue just because I'm sure Aldridge would be appealing to a guy like Spoelstra.
Yeah, for sure there. I mean, just trying to like look through other rosters, it gets hard. Like, it's hard to find a guy that like totally matches up with what Miami wants to do. But Pat Riley and Andy Ellsberg are very creative when it comes to this stuff. They tend to see things a little bit differently than the rest of the NBA.
Ellsberg is fantastic. I mean, he might be the best cap guy in the league. Just how they've done so many things contractually, like last offseason with the unlikely incentive signing them. And once you sign them, they don't count towards the cap anymore. So that's how they fit in so many things with like Johnson Waiters and Kelly Olynyk. So that was fantastic. I think they're a really, really well-run franchise. Everybody knows that. It's just they kind of went all in on a certain window, and now we're seeing the fallout of that. And I think a lot of people would perceive that as negative just because Twitter and most NBA fans see it as an either-or. You're either competing for a title or you're tanking, and Miami is definitely firmly in the middle.
Yeah, they're firmly in the middle, and the more I look at this, though, the more I think they have more options than what I initially thought. Like, whenever we started this conversation, because having guys like, James Johnson and Kelly Olynyk and Dion Waiters and Josh Richardson, they actually, like, give you really good salary matching tools as well. Which is something that a lot of teams right now don't have.
Yeah, having big contracts or like moderately big contracts is definitely useful, especially for superstar trades, just because a lot of teams are trying to aggregate so many contract value to add up to these bigger contracts, and Miami definitely has enough, depending on if the receiving team wants to take on extra years. Like Dion Waiters makes $12.6 million in 2020. Like, I don't know if a team is going to be super gung-ho on taking that contract back. I don't know. The market's always hard to predict, especially with free agency this year, where not a lot of teams have cap space. How much of a commodity is that open cap space going to be, both signing restricted free agents, unrestricted free agents, but also taking in maybe a contract instead of signing a guy. So there's a lot of variables, I guess, that are hard to predict.
Cole, I think that's about all we got here. What do we got coming up on your end?
I am eventually going to start putting out different segments of my big board. I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I'm kind of working on how to design it, but expect that within the next probably 2 weeks as far as initial installments. I'm not going to do like just one all-encompassing board this year at one time that's like a hour and 20-minute read, just because I don't want to I mean, for me personally, it's hard to write that much at one time, and also like it's really hard to read. So eventually at thestepin.com you will see me work on a big board, and yeah, that's basically all I got. Yeah,
I've got quite a large project coming in that vein soon, where I'm talking a lot about the guys who were early entrants into the NBA draft. Beyond that, yeah, I'll have stuff coming at The Athletic about the draft. I'll have this podcast, and we'll be in good shape. So until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.